They tied her up like an animal and left her for the sun to finish. Sister Margaret Rose hung from the twisted cottonwood, wrists ripped raw where the rope bit into bone. Her arms were stretched so high her shoulders screamed. Her bare feet couldn't reach the dirt. Her black habit was torn up her thighs, and two ropes ran from her ankles to opposite roots, yanking her legs apart until every breath tasted like shame. December 18th, 1878, the Rocky Mountains of Colorado Territory. 6:47 in the morning. The temperature had dropped to 12 degrees Fahrenheit and falling. Flies would have crawled over the blood on her knees if it hadn't been winter. Sweat had frozen in the cuts on her skin despite the cold. They had called her witch, devil-loving woman, Catholic poison. They had laughed as they rode away, 5 men on 5 horses disappearing into the gray dawn like ghosts who had finished their haunting. Now the only sound was the creak of rope and the dry rasp of her own breath clouding white in the frozen air. Sister Margaret tried to scream, but her voice came out broken, more a hiss than a cry. Her lips were cracked and bleeding from the cold. Her green eyes, once bright with faith and purpose, had dimmed to something harder, something that looked like acceptance. No one would hear. No one ever did in these mountains. She was 4.8 miles from Silver Point, the mining town that had sentenced her without trial. 4.8 miles might as well have been 400. She had tried to pray. The Lord's Prayer, the Hail Mary, even the Psalms her father had taught her when she was a girl in Boston, back when the world made sense and men didn't hang women from trees for the crime of healing. But the words wouldn't come anymore. Her tongue was too swollen, her throat too dry. All she could manage was a whisper that got lost in the wind. Then she heard it. Hoofbeats, slow, heavy, not the wild gallop of men who came to hurt. A steady 4 count that rolled through the grass like a promise. A sorrel horse appeared on the rise, breath steaming in the frigid air. The animal was strong, well-fed, the kind of horse that belonged to a man who knew how to survive where others died. The man in the saddle sat tall, hat pulled low, a coat the color of the earth itself dusted in yesterday's snow. His shoulders were impossibly wide, 48 inches across, wrapped in a bearskin that made him look like some ancient thing that had walked out of a legend. His beard was shot through with gray, thick, and wild, covering most of his face like a forest in miniature. His eyes, when he finally looked up at her, didn't widen in shock. They narrowed like a man squinting at a storm he had already walked through once and knew would come again. Jacob Stone, called Bear by the few who remembered him. 49 years old, though the mountains had aged him beyond his years. A widower for 12 years, a father who had buried his only son. A killer who had never forgotten the faces of those he'd killed. He reined in under the tree and slid to the ground with the careful movements of a man who had learned that haste got you killed in the high country. No hurry, no curse, no prayer. Just a long, slow look at the girl hanging above him, and Sister Margaret realized in that moment that this man had seen worse than this, had maybe done worse than this. Jacob stepped in close, right between her spread feet, where he could reach the knots if he stretched. From her angle, all she saw was his hat brim and his chest rising and falling with breaths that came slow and even. No panic, no urgency, just a methodical assessment of a problem that needed solving. Then his hands dropped to his belt. His fingers hooked into the front of his pants, tugging at something at his waistband, digging at something down there where no one else could see. Sister Margaret's heart went white with terror. In her exhausted, pain-addled mind, she jumped to the only conclusion that made sense after what the men from town had already done to her. After they had torn her clothes and laughed and made her feel like something less than human. "You want to put it in?" Her voice cracked on the last word, breaking like ice over a frozen stream. It was half question, half accusation, a final defiance from a woman who had nothing left to lose. For a moment, he said nothing. The wind hissed through the grass. A crow cried somewhere far off, black wings against a gray sky. The world held its breath. Then Jacob pulled his hand free from his belt, and in it was a small folding knife. A case 50 with a bone handle, the kind of knife a man carried for 1,000 small tasks, and never for killing unless he had to. He lifted his face just enough for her to see his eyes, flat and steady, blue as glacial ice. No lust there, no cruelty, just an exhaustion so deep it looked like it went all the way to his bones. "No, sister, I'm cutting you loose." The knife flashed in the weak morning light, sharp steel against worn rope. The sound of fibers snapping was like a gunshot in the stillness. Her body dropped. The world turned sideways. Sky and snow and the gray bark of the cottonwood all tumbling together in a kaleidoscope of confusion. Then she was caught. Two hands, large and calloused and surprisingly gentle, caught her before she hit the frozen ground. Jacob held her against his chest like she weighed nothing at all, and Sister Margaret felt warmth for the first time in hours. Real warmth, not the burning cold that tricks you into thinking you are not freezing to death. The smell of wood smoke and leather and something wild surrounded her. For the first time in 4 hours, she felt safe. And then the darkness took her. 600 yards away on the ridgeline above the cottonwood, Deputy William Hawkins sat on his horse and watched through the gray morning light. Billy was 24 years old, young enough to still believe in justice, old enough to know it didn't always come easy. His mother had been Mexican, and she had died when he was 12, not from sickness, but from the slow poison of being unwanted in a town that didn't trust people who looked like her. He had seen the mountain men cut the nun down, had seen him catch her. And from this distance, in this light, with no context for what had come before, it looked like something else entirely. It looked like a man holding a woman, looked like something that needed reporting. Billy knew what he should do. Ride down there, check on the sister, make sure she was all right, Meharmes. Do his job as a deputy of Silver Point. But he also knew what would happen if he did that. Colton Brennan and his men would arrive before Billy could even begin to understand what had happened. And if they found Sister Margaret still alive, still breathing, they would finish what they started. There would be no second chance. So Billy made a choice. He yanked his horse around, hard, spurring the animal into a gallop back toward town. The horse's hooves kicked up frozen clods of earth as they raced across the high meadow. He had to tell Sheriff Cooper, had to get there first, had to figure out how to save a nun's life without starting a war. But Silver Point was a small town, and small towns had big mouths. By the time Billy reached Main Street, half the town would know the witch still lived. And Colton Brennan, sitting in his big house on the hill, would hear it before the sun reached noon. The clock was already ticking. Jacob rode slow through the mountains. Sister Margaret draped across his saddle in front of him, her head resting against his chest. She drifted in and out of consciousness, mumbling words he couldn't quite catch. Sometimes English, sometimes what sounded like Latin. Once she said a name, Father. Then she was quiet again. The sorrel horse knew the way home without being told. 12 years on these same trails had taught the animal where to step, where the ice was too thin, where the path cut closest to the cliff edge. Jacob let the horse pick its way while he kept one arm around the woman to make sure she didn't fall. He tried not to think about what he had just done, tried not to think about the 5 riders who had left her there, or the rope burns on her wrists, or the way her legs had been spread wide for maximum humiliation. Tried not to think about the fact that he had just made himself an enemy of every man in Silver Point by cutting her down. Men didn't interfere with other men's justice in the Colorado Territory. Not if they wanted to keep breathing, but Jacob had stopped caring about that particular rule a long time ago. Around the time his wife died screaming in childbirth. Around the time his son stopped breathing in his arms, skin covered in the pustules of smallpox while Jacob held him and begged God for a miracle that never came. After that, the rules other men lived by seemed like toys, like things children played with to feel safe. His cabin sat at 9,400 feet, tucked into a stand of Douglas fir so thick you couldn't see it from more than 100 yards away. The back wall was built against a granite cliff face that protected it from the worst of the winter winds. Smoke rose from the stone chimney, thin and gray against the overcast sky. Jacob had built this place with his own hands after his son died, had cut every log, notched every joint, chinked every gap with moss and mud. It wasn't much, just 4 walls and a roof, a stone fireplace, 2 small windows with real glass he'd hauled up from Denver, a wooden door 4 inches thick with an iron bar to keep out bears and men. But it was his, the only thing in this world that was. He dismounted carefully, keeping Sister Margaret balanced against his shoulder. She was lighter than he expected, all thin bones and determination under that black habit. He carried her inside, pushing the door open with his hip. The cabin was warm. He had banked the fire before leaving at dawn to check his trap lines, and the coals were still glowing red in the fireplace. The single room smelled like wood smoke and coffee and the faint tang of tobacco. There were 2 beds, one in the corner where he slept, covered with a wool blanket and a bearskin. The other against the opposite wall, smaller, child-sized. The bed his son Daniel had slept in before the smallpox took him. Jacob hadn't been able to get rid of it, hadn't even been able to take the blanket off. For 10 years it had sat there, a monument to grief, and now he laid Sister Margaret down on it as gently as he knew how. She curled into herself immediately, knees drawn up, arms wrapped around her chest. Even unconscious, her body knew it had been hurt. Her eyes moved beneath her lids, rapid and fearful. Dreaming of the rope, probably. Dreaming of the men who had put her there. Jacob stood over her for a long moment, just watching her breathe. Then he turned away and began gathering what he needed, water first. He filled a pot from the barrel by the door and set it on the crane over the fire to heat. Not boiling, just warm enough to clean wounds without causing more damage. Then his medical kit, such as it was. A leather pouch he had put together over the years. Clean cloth for bandages. A needle and thread made from deer sinew. A small jar of bear grease he rendered himself every fall. Dried sage leaves. Yarrow for bleeding. Wild mint for swelling. He had learned these things the hard way. When your wife is dying in childbirth and the nearest doctor is 2 days away. When your son is burning with fever and all you have is prayer and herbs and desperation. The prayers hadn't worked, but the herbs sometimes did. By the time the water was warm, Sister Margaret was stirring. Her eyes opened slowly, green and unfocused, looking around the cabin like she couldn't quite figure out where she was or how she had gotten there. Where am I? Her voice was hoarse, barely more than a whisper. My cabin. You're safe now. Sister Margaret looked at him then, really looked at him, and he saw the moment when memory came flooding back. Saw her body tense, saw her eyes go wide with fear. Safe? She laughed once, a broken, bitter sound. I'll never be safe again. Jacob didn't argue with her. She was probably right. He just knelt beside the bed and opened his kit, laying out the supplies where she could see them, being careful to make no sudden movements. These need tending. Your wrists. He reached for her and she flinched back hard, almost rolling off the narrow bed. Hold on, I'm just getting my knife to cut the rest of that rope off you. This time he said it slow and clear, pulling the knife from his belt where she could see it, opening it with deliberate care. Showing her that it was a tool, not a weapon. That his hands were here to help, not hurt. Sister Margaret watched him with the wariness of a wild animal, but she didn't pull away again. She held out her wrists, and Jacob saw the damage clearly for the first time in good light. The rope had cut deep, not just into the skin, but into the muscle beneath. The flesh was purple and black with bruising, split open in places where the rope had sawed back and forth as she struggled. Blood had dried in thick crusts, but fresh blood still seeped from the deepest cuts. Jesus Christ. The words were out before he could stop them. Please don't take the Lord's name in vain. Even now, even after everything, she corrected him. It almost made him smile. Sorry, sister, but these need immediate treatment. Infection sets in fast this time of year. You could lose the use of your hands if we don't clean them proper. Then do what you must. She said it simply, like a woman who had already made peace with pain. Jacob washed his own hands first in the warm water, scrubbing them the way he'd seen the army surgeon do during the war. Then he soaked a clean cloth and began working on her wrists, dabbing gently at the dried blood, softening it so he could see the wounds beneath. Sister Margaret bit her lip but didn't make a sound. He could see the tension in her jaw, the way her fingers curled into fists, but she bore it in silence. When the wounds were clean, he mixed his poultice. Bear grease, still soft from being kept by the fire, mixed with crushed sage leaves and yarrow and mint. The smell was strong, medicinal. Clean in a way that had nothing to do with soap. What is that? Her voice was steadier now, curious despite the pain. Bear grease mixed with herbs. Sage fights infection. Yarrow stops bleeding. Mint brings down swelling. Old recipe. Indians taught it to the mountain men, and my father taught it to me. He applied it carefully, working it into the wounds with gentle fingers. Then he wrapped her wrists in clean linen strips, not too tight, leaving room for swelling. You know medicine? Had to learn. When my boy got sick 10 years ago, nearest doctor was 2 days' ride through snow. Smallpox doesn't wait for doctors. His voice went flat on the last sentence. Sister Margaret heard the weight in it, the grief that time hadn't managed to bury. I'm sorry. Long time ago. He finished the bandaging and stood, gathering his supplies. She needed rest now. Food eventually. But mostly rest. You should sleep. I'll be outside if you need anything. Wait. He stopped at the door, hand on the latch. Why did you save me? The question hung in the air between them. Jacob thought about lying, about saying something noble or righteous, about making himself sound like something better than he was. But he had spent too many years alone to remember how to lie well. I didn't save you, sister. You cut me down. That's not the same thing. Saving you would mean I had a reason, something purposeful. I didn't. I just couldn't ride past. I already got enough ghosts in my head keeping me awake at night. Didn't need another one. He stepped outside and closed the door behind him, leaving her alone with that truth. The temperature had dropped to 8 degrees. Jacob stood on the small porch and looked out at the mountains, at the endless white peaks stretching away in every direction. This was his kingdom, his prison, the place he had run to when the world below became too much to bear. And now he had brought the world's trouble right to his door. He knew they would come, knew it as sure as he knew the sun would set tonight and rise tomorrow. The men who had hung her wouldn't stop just because someone had cut her down. They would see it as theft, as interference, as something that required a response. Jacob went to the horse shelter and began unsaddling his mount, working with the automatic motions of long practice. The sorrel horse nickered softly and pushed its nose against his chest, looking for the piece of dried apple Jacob usually carried. Not today, friend. Used my last piece yesterday. He rubbed the horse's neck, feeling the warmth of the animal's body, the solid reality of muscle and bone and life. Then he walked the perimeter of his property, checking the fence, looking for tracks. He found them 50 yards from the cabin. Boot prints in the snow, fresh, maybe 2 or 3 hours old. Someone had been here, had stood in the trees watching his cabin, had counted his windows and marked his door, and then disappeared back into the forest. A scout, someone sent ahead to learn the lay of the land before the main force arrived. Jacob knelt and studied the prints. Large boots, maybe size 11 or 12. A heavy man. The prints sank deep and were spaced far apart. Someone tall, someone who moved carefully, stepping from rock to rock where he could to hide his trail. A professional. Jacob stood and looked into the forest, into the shadows between the trees where the pine boughs hung heavy with snow. I know you're out there, he said it quietly, just loud enough for the words to carry into the woods. No response, no movement, but he knew someone was listening. He turned and walked back to the cabin, but his hand never left the rifle slung over his shoulder. Inside, Sister Margaret sat on the edge of the bed, her bandaged hands folded in her lap. She wasn't sleeping. Couldn't sleep, probably. Not after what she'd been through. Can't sleep? Jacob closed the door and set his rifle by the fireplace. Every time I close my eyes, I'm back on that tree. That'll pass. Takes time. My wife used to say the same thing after the Indian raid near our old homestead back in '64. Took her 6 months before she could sleep through the night again. Your wife? Dead 12 years now. Died giving birth to our second child. Baby didn't make it either. Breech birth, too much blood. I tried everything I knew, but it wasn't enough. He said it matter-of-factly, like he was talking about the weather or the price of flour. But Sister Margaret heard the pain underneath, the kind of pain that never really goes away, just gets buried deeper. I'm sorry. Jacob shrugged and picked up a piece of wood he had been carving before he left that morning. It was meant to be a horse, small enough to fit in a child's hand. He had started it for Daniel years ago and never finished it. Every time he tried, his hands would stop moving, frozen by memory. My boy Daniel lived until he was 8. Smallpox got him in '68. After that, I came up here. Didn't see much point in being around people anymore. He picked up his knife and began working on the wooden horse again, letting his hands move while his mind stayed still. That's for your son? Sister Margaret was looking at the carving, her head tilted slightly to one side. Was going to be. For his 8th birthday. Never finished it. Every time I try, I just stop. It's beautiful anyway. It's not done. Maybe that's the point. Maybe some things don't need to be finished to be beautiful. Maybe they just need to exist. Jacob looked at her then, really looked at her for the first time since bringing her inside. She was young, maybe 27 or 28. Her hair, now that the head covering was gone, was a dark reddish brown, the color of autumn leaves. Her eyes were the green of deep forest pools. Her face was thin but strong, with the kind of features that would have made her pretty if she hadn't been beaten and frozen and traumatized. But it was her expression that caught him. There was strength there, intelligence, a refusal to break that he recognized because he had seen it in the mirror for 12 years. You talk like a priest, sister. I'm a nun. We think about things. Nuns don't usually end up hanging from cottonwood trees. I didn't plan on it. A sound came out of Jacob then, dry and unused. It took him a moment to realize it was laughter. He couldn't remember the last time he had laughed. Why did they call you witch? Sister Margaret looked down at her bandaged hands. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but steady. I healed a boy, saved him from typhoid fever. At the same time, another boy died of the same fever. Someone had to be blamed. A woman who knows medicine, who can save lives, who doesn't need a man to tell her what to do. In their minds, that's not natural. That's witchcraft. Who was the boy who died? Benjamin Brennan, son of Colton Brennan, who owns most of the silver mine and half the town, 19 years old. Good boy, from what I heard. Didn't deserve what happened to him. What did happen to him? The doctor gave him mercury. Too much mercury. The boy didn't die from typhoid. He died from mercury poisoning. But admitting that would mean admitting the doctor made a mistake. Easier to blame me. Jacob set down his carving and knife. He had suspected something like this. Had seen it before, the way men would rather burn a scapegoat than admit their own failures. They're going to come for you. Tomorrow maybe the day after. And when they do, I might not be able to stop them all. Then let them take me. You've done enough, more than anyone else would have. No. The word came out harder than he intended. Sister Margaret looked up, surprised by the force of it. This isn't about what's enough. This is about what's right. I've done enough wrong things in my life, sister. More than you know, more than I can count. But this, right here, right now, this I can do right. What did you do that was so wrong? Jacob was quiet for a long time. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. Snow began to fall again, thick flakes that would cover the boot prints by morning. I was in the 3rd Colorado Cavalry during the war. Indian wars, they called them, though it was more like murder than war. We were chasing Apache raiders who'd hit a settlement near Taos in '63. He paused, gathering the words, forcing them out past the wall he had built around this memory. We found a camp, women, children, old men, no warriors. But we were young and angry and stupid, and our lieutenant said they were hiding the raiders. Said we needed to make an example. Sister Margaret's eyes widened slightly, but she didn't speak, didn't interrupt. We burned the camp, killed 23 people. Men, women, children, didn't matter. Later we found out they weren't Apache at all. They were Mexican farmers who'd fled north during the wars between America and Mexico, just people trying to survive. And we murdered them. I shot a woman that day. She was holding a child, maybe 5 years old. I can still see their faces. Every night when I close my eyes, I see them. The silence in the cabin was absolute. Even the fire seemed to burn quieter. So when I saw you on that tree, Sister Margaret, I saw them. Saw another innocent person being killed for something they didn't do. And I thought maybe, just maybe, God was giving me one chance. One chance to not be a coward. One chance to save instead of kill. You're not a coward. You're the bravest man I've ever met. Jacob shook his head. Brave would have been stopping my unit that day. Brave would have been standing up to the lieutenant and saying no. Brave would have been a lot of things I wasn't. But you're being brave now. That's what matters. He wanted to believe her, wanted to think that one right action could somehow balance out all the wrong ones. But he had lived too long with his ghost to believe in easy redemption. They sat in silence as the fire burned low and the snow piled higher outside. Finally, Sister Margaret lay back down on the small bed, exhaustion overcoming fear. Jacob added wood to the fire and settled into his chair by the window, rifle across his lap. He didn't sleep, just watched the darkness outside and waited for whatever was coming, because something was coming. He could feel it the way you feel a storm building on the horizon, the way animals know when the earth is about to shake. Tomorrow would bring riders. Tomorrow would bring choices. Tomorrow would bring the kind of trouble that couldn't be talked away or reasoned with. But tonight, for just a few hours, he had done something right, had saved a life instead of taking one. And if that was all he ever managed to do that mattered, maybe it would be enough. The snow fell harder, covering the boot prints, covering the blood on the cottonwood, covering the whole mountain in a blanket of white that looked like forgiveness, but wasn't. In Silver Point, 6 miles down the mountain, Deputy Billy Hawkins burst through the door of the Long Branch Saloon at 11:30 in the morning. The place was already full, miners drinking away their wages, cowboys in from the range, merchants taking their lunch with whiskey instead of food. Sheriff Henry Cooper sat at a corner table with Colton Brennan and Dr. Philip Hammond. All three men looked up as Billy approached, breathless and covered in snow. "Sheriff, Mr. Brennan, I need to speak with you. Now." The urgency in Billy's voice cut through the noise of the saloon. Other conversations died down. Heads turned. "What is it, Deputy?" Colton Brennan stood slowly, his bulk casting a shadow across the table. He was a big man, not tall but wide, built like a bull. His black vest was tailored, expensive. The watch chain across his chest was solid gold. Everything about him said money and power. "I saw her. The nun. She's alive." The saloon went silent. Even the piano player stopped mid-tune. "What did you say?" Billy swallowed hard, suddenly aware that every eye in the room was on him, that what he said next would determine everything that followed. "I was patrolling up near Eagle's Nest this morning. I saw the cottonwood tree, and I saw a man there. He cut her down, carried her away on his horse." "Who was the man?" "I couldn't see clear from where I was, but he was big, real big, riding a sorrel horse, wearing a bearskin. Could only be one person who fits that description up in the high country. Jacob Stone." Colton said the name like a curse, like something foul tasting on his tongue. "The hermit? The one who lives up past the timberline? That Jacob Stone?" "Yes, sir, I'm certain of it." Hammond, who had been drinking steadily since breakfast, nearly dropped his glass. His hand shook so badly that whiskey slopped over the rim. "That madman has the witch. God help us all." Colton turned to Sheriff Cooper, and the look on his face was something terrible to see. Not just anger, not just grief, something darker, something that looked like a man whose last anchor to sanity had just been cut loose. "We ride now. Anyone who wants justice for my son, meet at the stable in 1 hour. Bring guns and rope." The saloon erupted into motion. Men pushed back from tables. Glasses were drained in single gulps. Someone ran for the door to spread the word. Sheriff Cooper stood slowly, and Billy could see the conflict written all over his face. The sheriff was a good man at heart, fair-minded, but he was also weak. He had a sick wife and 3 children and a mortgage on his house that Colton Brennan held. "Colton, maybe we should think about this. The circuit judge is coming through in 10 days. We could hold a proper trial. My son is dead, Henry. That witch killed him with her devil magic, and now some mountain trash is hiding her. We ride with or without you. Your choice." It wasn't really a choice, and everyone in the room knew it. "All right, but we do this legal. We bring her in for trial, no lynching without due process." Colton smiled, but there was no warmth in it, no humanity. "Of course, Sheriff, by the book, just like you say." But Billy, watching Colton's eyes, knew it was a lie, knew that if they found Sister Margaret alive, she wouldn't make it back to town. Justice, in Colton Brennan's mind, didn't involve judges or juries. It involved rope in a tree and a woman who couldn't defend herself. Billy waited until the crowd had dispersed, then pulled Sheriff Cooper aside. "Sheriff, we can't let them do this. She's innocent." "I know she is. You know that how, Deputy?" "Because I talked to Rosa Martinez yesterday. She was there the night Benjamin died. She saw Dr. Hammond treating him. She said the doctor was drunk, said he gave the boy too much medicine. Way too much." Sheriff Cooper glanced over at Dr. Hammond, who was now on his 3rd whiskey of the hour, his hand still shaking. "Did she see exactly what medicine?" "Mercury. A whole bottle of it, near enough. She said the boy was vomiting blood within an hour. That's not typhoid, Sheriff. That's poison." Cooper was quiet for a long moment, wrestling with something. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Even if that's true, Billy, even if the doctor made a mistake, Colton won't believe it. He can't believe it. Because if he does, then his son died for nothing. No witch to blame, no one to punish, just bad luck and a drunk doctor. A man like Colton needs someone to hate, needs it like he needs air. So we let an innocent woman die?" "I didn't say that. But I'm telling you, if we ride up there with 20 armed men, someone's going to die. Maybe the nun, maybe the mountain man, maybe both, maybe us if we get in the way. You understand what I'm saying?" Billy understood that his sheriff, who he had looked up to and respected, was too scared to do the right thing. "Then I'll go alone, warn them, give them a chance to run. You do that, and Colton will have you arrested for obstruction. You'll lose your badge. Maybe worse, then I lose my badge. Billy turned to leave, but Sheriff Cooper caught his arm. Wait, if you're going to do this, do it smart. Ride out now before the posse forms. Get there first. But don't warn them to run, Billy. Running makes them look guilty. Tell them to prepare. Tell them we're coming. Give that mountain man time to make his stand if he's fool enough to make one. And if he is, then God help us all. Billy left the saloon and headed straight for the stable. His horse was still saddled from the morning ride. He swung up and turned the animal north, toward the high country, toward the mountains where Jacob Stone lived alone with his ghosts. The sky had turned the color of old iron. More snow was coming, the kind of storm that could bury a man in a matter of hours. But Billy didn't slow down. He had maybe 2 hours before Colton's posse formed. 2 hours to ride 6 miles uphill through snow. He dug his heels into his horse's flanks and raced against time and weather and the darkness that men carry in their hearts when grief turns to rage. Jacob woke in his chair by the window, rifle still across his lap, neck stiff from sleeping upright. He had learned long ago that comfort was a luxury you couldn't always afford. Sister Margaret was awake, sitting on the edge of the small bed with her bandaged hands folded in her lap. She looked better than yesterday. Color had returned to her face. Her eyes were clearer, but there was something else there too, a determination that hadn't been there before. You should rest more. She shook her head. I've rested enough. Now I need to be useful. Jacob stood and stretched, joints popping like kindling. You almost died yesterday, which is why I can't just sit here waiting for them to come back. If I'm staying, I need to learn, need to know how to survive up here. He studied her for a long moment. Most women he had known would have been content to hide, to wait for rescue or death, whichever came first. But Sister Margaret wasn't most women. She had steel in her spine. The kind you couldn't teach. The kind you either had or you didn't. All right, but we start slow. He handed her a piece of jerked venison and a tin cup of water. She ate slowly, mechanically, like someone who had forgotten what hunger felt like but knew her body needed fuel. When she finished, Jacob opened the door. The world outside was buried under 8 inches of fresh snow. The sky was the color of old pewter. The temperature had dropped to 5 degrees. First lesson, you stay warm or you die. Everything else is secondary. He showed her how to bank a fire properly, how to feed it so it burns steady instead of hot and fast, how to tell good firewood from bad by the weight and the way it split, how to stack it so air could flow between the pieces. She learned quick, asking questions that showed she was thinking ahead. What about wet wood? How long does a cord last? What if the chimney gets blocked? Smart questions. Survivor questions. After an hour of fire management, he took her outside. The cold hit like a fist. Sister Margaret gasped but didn't complain. He handed her a smaller axe, lighter than his, but still substantial. Chopping wood keeps you warm twice. Once when you chop it, once when you burn it. But you do it wrong, you'll hurt yourself worse than the cold ever could. He showed her the stance. Feet shoulder-width apart. Grip low on the handle. Let gravity and the weight of the axe head do the work. Aim for the cracks in the wood, not just anywhere. Her first swing went wide, the axe biting into frozen ground instead of wood. She looked at him, expecting criticism. Again, adjust your angle. Her second swing was better. The third split the log clean through. She looked surprised, then pleased. Good. Now do that 99 more times, and you'll have enough wood for 3 days. Her face fell. 99. Winter doesn't care about your feelings, sister. You stay warm or you freeze. Your choice. They worked in silence for half an hour, the sound of axes biting wood echoing across the frozen meadow. Jacob kept glancing at the tree line, watching for movement, but saw nothing. The forest was still. Too still. By mid-morning, Sister Margaret's face was flushed with exertion despite the cold. Her hands, still bandaged, had to be hurting, but she didn't stop. Didn't complain, just kept swinging until the pile of split wood was waist high. That's enough for now. You'll feel it tomorrow. I feel it now. Jacob almost smiled. Come on, I'll show you the trap lines. They walked through the forest, following paths Jacob had worn over 12 years of solitary living. He showed her how to read tracks in the snow, deer prints, sharp and deep. Rabbit tracks, paired front and back. The distinctive pad marks of a mountain lion, which made her stop dead and look around nervously. Don't worry, cats don't hunt during the day unless they're starving. And there's enough game up here to keep them fed. He showed her his snare sets, simple loops of wire positioned at neck height on trails the rabbits used. When an animal ran through, the loop tightened, the bent sapling sprang up, and death came quick. Humane as trapping could be. They checked 6 snares. 5 were empty. The 6th held a fat snowshoe hare, already frozen stiff. Sister Margaret stared at the dead animal, her face unreadable. I've treated hundreds of patients, amputated limbs, set broken bones, delivered babies, but I've never killed anything. You don't have to now, I can handle it. No. If I'm going to live here, I need to know how. Show me. Jacob pulled his knife from his belt. The blade was 8 inches of folded steel, sharp enough to shave with. He knelt beside the frozen hare. Quick cut behind the head. Severs the spine. The animal's already dead, but this makes sure. You honor its death by using every part. Meat, fur, sinew. Nothing wasted. He looked up at her. You want to do it? Sister Margaret knelt beside him in the snow. Her hands shook as she took the knife. She closed her eyes for a moment, lips moving in silent prayer. Then she opened them and made the cut. It was quick, clean, professional. The kind of cut a surgeon would make. Jacob skinned the rabbit with practiced efficiency, showing her where to make the incisions, how to peel the hide away without damaging it. Sister Margaret watched intently, memorizing every movement. That rabbit feeds us for 2 days. The fur makes mittens or hat lining. The sinew becomes thread. The bones boil down to broth. Nothing's wasted. That's the first rule of surviving up here. They walked back to the cabin, Sister Margaret carrying the skin carcass like it was something precious instead of something dead. There was blood on her hands, but she didn't seem to notice her care. That afternoon, Jacob set up 3 empty whiskey bottles on the fence rail 50 yards from the cabin. He handed Sister Margaret a Winchester carbine, lighter and shorter than his Sharps rifle. You need to know how to use this. I'm a nun. I took vows. You also took vows to live. Which one matters more right now? She took the rifle, handling it like it might explode. The wood was smooth under her fingers, worn from use but well-maintained. Stock goes tight into your shoulder, right here. If you don't press it tight, the recoil will bruise you bad. Both eyes open, line up the front sight with the back sight. Put that on your target. Breathe in deep. Halfway out, hold it. Squeeze the trigger. Don't jerk. Squeeze. Sister Margaret raised the rifle. It wavered. Her arms weren't strong enough yet to hold it steady. The shot went wide, 3 feet to the right of the bottles. The sound echoed across the valley like thunder. Again, she reloaded, hands fumbling with the mechanism. Jacob showed her once more, patient and methodical. She fired. Closer this time. A foot to the right. Better. Breathe. The 3rd shot shattered the center bottle. Glass exploded in a spray that caught the weak sunlight. Sister Margaret lowered the rifle, eyes wide with surprise. I did it. You did. Now do it 14 more times and you might hit something when you're scared and your hands are shaking and someone's shooting back. They practiced until her shoulder was bruised and her ears were ringing despite the cold air. She hit 7 bottles out of 20 shots. Not great, but not terrible for a first-timer. As the sun started its early winter descent, they heard it. The sound that Jacob had been dreading all day. Hoofbeats, multiple horses, and coming fast up the trail. Get inside. Now, Sister Margaret didn't argue. She ran for the cabin. Jacob grabbed the Winchester and followed, slamming the door shut behind them. He dropped the heavy iron bar across it and pushed a wooden chest in front for extra measure. Through the window, he counted riders. 20 men, maybe more. They fanned out in a semicircle around the cabin, just out of rifle range. Smart. Whoever was leading them knew what they were doing. A voice rang out across the snow, deep, angry, raw with grief. Thornwood, Jacob Stone, I know you're in there. Send out the witch, and this ends peaceful. Jacob didn't answer. He moved to the second window, checking the back approach. Clear so far, but that could change. Stone, you hear me? That woman killed my son. She used her devil magic and now he's dead. I want her, now. Sister Margaret stood in the center of the cabin, hands clasped in front of her, face pale but composed. You should give me to them. You've done enough. Jacob loaded his rifle without looking at her. Not happening. They'll kill you too. Maybe. But I didn't save you just to hand you back. That would make the whole thing pointless. A new voice called out, younger, more reasonable. That was Deputy Billy Hawkins. Jacob would bet his last dollar on it. Mr. Stone, I'm Deputy Hawkins. I need to talk to you. It's important. Jacob moved to the front window, keeping his body behind the thick log wall. What do you want, Deputy? I need you to listen. The nun didn't kill Benjamin Brennan. We have evidence. Dr. Hammond gave the boy too much mercury. It was an accident, not murder. Lies! Colton Brennan's voice again, cracking with rage. The deputy's been bewitched too. Send her out, Stone, or we burn you out. Then a third voice, older, measured, carrying the weight of authority that came from wearing a collar instead of a badge. Mr. Stone, this is Reverend Thomas Grayson. I've ridden all the way from Silver Point. May I approach? I'm unarmed. I just want to talk. Jacob thought about it. A man of God might be worth hearing out. Then again, men of God had started more wars than they'd ended. Come ahead, slowly, hands where I can see them. The semicircle of riders parted. A man dismounted and walked forward. He was tall, thin, dressed in black with a white collar. But there was something about the way he moved, something that said this man had been more than just a preacher in his life. Reverend Grayson stopped 20 feet from the cabin, close enough to talk without shouting, far enough that Jacob could drop him if it was a trick. Mr. Stone, I'm not here to threaten you. I'm here because Sister Margaret saved my son's life. Samuel had typhoid. The doctor said he would die. But she sat with him for 9 days and 9 nights, barely slept, barely ate, just kept him hydrated and cool and alive. My boy is walking around today because of her. That's real nice, Reverend, but it doesn't change the situation. No, it doesn't, which is why I'm here to help. I brought supplies, food, medicine, and I brought this. And I must stay honest. Reverend Grayson pulled back his coat. Tucked in his belt was a Colt revolver, old but well-maintained. I was a Texas Ranger before I found God, Mr. Stone. Wore the badge for 23 years. I know how to use this, and if men come here planning to harm an innocent woman, I'll answer to God later. Jacob felt something shift inside him, a loosening of tension he hadn't realized he was carrying. He wasn't alone anymore. You come any closer to that cabin, Grayson, and I'll shoot you where you stand. Colton's voice was nearly hysterical now. Then you'll have to shoot me, Colton, because I'm walking up to that door, and unless you want to explain to the whole town why you shot a preacher in the back, you'll let me. Reverend Grayson walked to the cabin door. Jacob opened it just wide enough for the man to slip through, then barred it again. The Reverend looked at Sister Margaret, and his face softened. Sister, thank God you're alive. Samuel has been praying for you every night. Is he well? Perfect. Thanks to you. Then it wasn't for nothing. Reverend Grayson turned to Jacob. They're going to attack, tonight probably. Colton's beyond reason. The sheriff is trying to keep it legal, but he's scared. And there's a man with them, a gunfighter. Russian fellow named Viktor Volkov. He's the real danger. How many guns? 20, maybe 25. Some are just minors who'll run at the first shot, but 10 of them are serious. They'll fight. Jacob paused. What do you know about this Volkov? Reverend Grayson's face darkened. Not much. But Rosa Martinez told me something strange. She saw him at the church 3 days ago, just standing there in front of the statue of Mary. When she asked if he needed help, he said something in Russian, then in English. He said, "My mother was a holy woman. I wonder what she would think of what I have become. A killer with a conscience. That's more dangerous than a killer with none. Why? Because you never know which way he'll turn when the moment comes." Jacob did the math. 3 defenders, even with good cover and better shooting positions, against 10 determined men with professional backup. The numbers weren't good. We can't win this. Jacob did the math. 3 defenders, even with good cover and better shooting positions, against 10 determined men with professional backup. The numbers weren't good. We can't win this. Reverend Grayson surprised him by smiling. Son, I didn't ride 6 miles through snow to win. I rode here to do what's right. Sometimes that's enough. The 3 of them spent the rest of the afternoon preparing. Jacob showed them his defensive positions. The thick log walls would stop most bullets. The windows were small and high, hard to shoot through from outside. The cliff face behind meant they couldn't be surrounded completely. But fire was the real threat. The cabin was wood, dry wood. If they set it burning, the 3 of them would have to run, and running meant dying. Sister Margaret worked alongside them without complaint, moving furniture, stacking supplies, preparing bandages from torn cloth. Her medical training showed in the efficient way she organized a field hospital in the corner. Water, clean cloth, needle and thread, whiskey for disinfecting. As darkness fell, they ate cold jerky and drank water. No fire tonight. The smoke would give away their positions inside the cabin. Outside, they could see the glow of multiple campfires. The posse had made camp 200 yards away, close enough to watch, far enough to be safe from rifle fire. They're waiting for something. Jacob stood at the window watching the distant fires. Waiting for what? Sister Margaret asked. For us to run, or for reinforcements, or maybe just for courage. It's easier to attack a cabin full of people when you're half drunk and the sun's not watching. Will they attack tonight? If they're smart, they'll wait until just before dawn. That's when people are most tired, when guards fall asleep, when mistakes get made. Reverend Grayson checked his revolver for the 10th time. How long can we hold? Jacob was quiet for a moment. Against 25 men, maybe an hour, maybe less if they use fire. Then we make that hour count. They took turns sleeping, 2 awake and 1 resting at all times. Jacob took the first watch with Reverend Grayson. Sister Margaret lay down on the small bed but didn't close her eyes. Around midnight, as Jacob and Reverend Grayson kept watch, the Reverend spoke quietly. You know, Mr. Stone, I've been thinking, if we survive this, what becomes of Sister Margaret? Jacob was quiet for a moment. She can't go back to the church. Not after this. They'll have questions she can't answer. And you? Will you go back to your mountain? Don't have a mountain anymore. They burned it. Reverend Grayson looked at him in the dim light. You care for her. I can see it. And unless I'm mistaken, she cares for you too. Jacob said nothing, but his silence was answer enough. If you want, Reverend Grayson said, I can perform a ceremony right now, before whatever comes at dawn. In the eyes of God, you'd be married. Her vows to the church would be released. She'd be free to choose a new life. With you, if she'll have you. Jacob looked at Sister Margaret, sleeping fitfully on the small bed. You'd do that? Now I'm an ordained minister. And sometimes when death is close, people need to grab hold of life. To choose something instead of just waiting. If she agrees, I'll marry you. Right here. Right now. Jacob walked to the bed. Sister Margaret wasn't asleep. Her eyes opened immediately. You heard? She nodded. And? She held out her hand. Yes, Mr. Stone. I'll marry you. The ceremony was simple. 3 minutes at most. No rings, no flowers, just words spoken in whispers by firelight. Reverend Grayson blessed them. Jacob kissed her hand, too shy to do more. And just like that, Sister Margaret Rose became Margaret Stone. They didn't speak of it after. There wasn't time. But as dawn approached and the attack began, they both knew. Whatever happened, they had chosen each other. And that choice mattered. Around midnight, she spoke into the darkness. Mr. Stone, yes? Why did you really save me? The truth this time. Jacob was quiet for so long, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he began to speak, his voice low and rough with memory. 15 years ago, I was in the 3rd Colorado Cavalry. We were hunting Apache raiders near Taos. Found a camp, mostly women and children. Our lieutenant said they were hiding warriors. Said we needed to send a message. He paused, the words catching in his throat. We burned it. The whole camp. Killed everyone inside. 23 people. Later found out they weren't Apache at all. Just Mexican farmers who'd fled north. People who never hurt anyone. I shot a woman that day. She was holding a little girl. I can see their faces clear as I see you now. Every night for 15 years I see them. Sister Margaret sat up slowly. And when you saw me, I saw them. Saw another innocent person about to die for nothing. And I thought maybe this was my chance, my one chance to do something right. To save instead of kill. Maybe it doesn't balance the scales. Maybe nothing ever will. But I had to try. The cabin was silent except for the crackling of banked coals in the fireplace. Redemption is real, Mr. Stone. I have to believe that. Otherwise, what's the point of any of it? Jacob turned to look at her, and in the dim light, she could see tears on his weathered face. I hope you're right, sister. I truly do. They sat in companionable silence after that. 3 people who had all lost something, all made mistakes, all hoping for a second chance that might never come. At 3 in the morning, Reverend Grayson woke Jacob from his short rest. We have movement. North side. Jacob moved to the window. In the faint starlight, he could see shapes moving through the trees. 2 men, maybe 3, trying to get closer without being seen. He raised his rifle and fired once. The muzzle flash lit up the cabin for a split second. Outside, someone cried out, and there was the sound of running feet retreating. They're testing us, seeing if we're awake, seeing how fast we can respond. It's starting then. Yes. The attack came at 4:30 in the morning, in that dead hour before dawn when the body wants nothing more than sleep. It started with gunfire, not aimed shots, just noise. Bullets slamming into the log walls, making the whole cabin shake but not penetrating. Jacob and Reverend Grayson returned fire, shooting at muzzle flashes, not expecting to hit anything but wanting to show they were awake and ready. After 5 minutes, the shooting stopped. Silence fell, more ominous than the gunfire. Why did they stop? Sister Margaret crouched behind the heavy wooden table Jacob had overturned for cover. They're thinking, realizing this isn't going to be easy. Then came the new sound, not gunfire, something else. A crackling, growing sound that Jacob recognized with cold dread. Fire. He looked out the window. The horse shelter was burning. Flames 30 feet high licking at the night sky. The horses inside were screaming. Reverend Grayson was already moving. We have to save them. It's too late. They're already dead. And that's not the target. What do you mean? The fire's just to light up the cabin. Now they can see every window, every door, anywhere we might shoot from, and we can't see them because we're looking into the light. As if to prove his point, a bullet smashed through the window near his head. Then another. The shooters had found their range. Get down. Everyone down. They huddled behind what cover they had as bullets tore through the cabin, glass shattered, wood splintered, the air filled with the smell of gunpowder and smoke. Jacob waited for a pause in the firing, then popped up and fired 3 quick shots toward the muzzle flashes he had marked in his memory. He heard a scream. 1 down. How many left? The siege went on for an hour. The posse would fire until they ran low on ammunition, then pause to reload. Jacob and Reverend Grayson would use those pauses to return fire, making every bullet count because they didn't have many to spare. Sister Margaret stayed low, keeping pressure on a cut on Reverend Grayson's arm, where a splinter had opened him up. Her hands were steady despite the chaos. A surgeon's hands. Then came a new sound, shouting, close to the cabin. They're rushing us! Jacob levered another round into his rifle. Get ready! Dark shapes appeared at the windows, men trying to climb through. Jacob shot the first one at point-blank range. The man fell backwards without a sound. Reverend Grayson shot another, then another. But there were too many. For every man they dropped, 2 more appeared. The cabin was being overrun. Back door, now! Jacob grabbed Sister Margaret's arm and pulled her toward the rear of the cabin. Reverend Grayson provided covering fire, his old Colt barking in the enclosed space. Jacob threw open the back door. Cold air rushed in. Beyond it, the dark forest and the mountain rising up into the night. Run! Don't look back! I'll be right behind you! Sister Margaret hesitated. Mr. Stone, go! She ran. Reverend Grayson followed. Jacob fired his last 2 shots into the mass of men trying to force their way through the front door, then turned and sprinted after them. Behind him, the cabin that had been his home for 12 years, filled with men who wanted blood. His possessions, his memories. The wooden horse he'd carved for his son, all of it left behind. But he was alive. They were alive, and that was all that mattered, it showed. They ran into the forest, feet crunching in the deep snow. Behind them, shouts and curses as the posse realized their prey had escaped. Then the sound of horses being mounted. The chase was on. Jacob led them up the mountain, away from the main trail, into country he knew and they didn't. The forest was pitch black under the heavy pine canopy. They ran by feel and memory, hands outstretched to avoid trees, feet finding the path by instinct. Sister Margaret fell once, sprawling in the snow. Jacob hauled her up without stopping. Reverend Grayson's breath came in ragged capes. None of them were young anymore. None of them built for this kind of exertion at this elevation. Behind them, the pursuing horses crashed through the underbrush, getting closer. There, a voice called out. I see them! A gunshot cracked. The bullet hit a tree 6 inches from Jacob's head, showering him with bark. Keep moving! We're almost to the ridge. They burst out of the tree line onto an open slope. The first gray light of dawn was just starting to show in the east. And in that light, Jacob saw their salvation and their doom at the same time. Above them, a narrow trail led up to a rocky pass. If they could reach it, they could defend it. 2 men in a pass could hold off 20. It was perfect defensive ground. But between them and that pass was 400 yards of open slope. No cover, no concealment, just deep snow and the growing light that would make them perfect targets. No choice, run! They ran, legs burning, lungs screaming. The snow was thigh-deep in places, dragging at them, trying to pull them down. Sister Margaret's bandaged hands left red marks in the snow where her wounds had opened up again. The horsemen burst from the tree line behind them. 20 men on 20 horses, and in the lead, on a black stallion, was Colton Brennan himself. His face was twisted with rage and grief and something that looked like madness. There, the witch! Don't let her reach the pass. Bullets kicked up snow all around them. One passed so close to Jacob's ear, he felt the heat of it. Another hit Reverend Grayson's coat, tearing through the fabric but missing flesh by inches. They were halfway up the slope when Jacob heard it, a sound that turned his blood to ice, a sound he had heard before, long ago and never forgotten, the deep, rumbling growl of something very large and very angry. He looked up. At the mouth of the pass, silhouetted against the growing dawn, was a grizzly bear, 9 feet tall when it reared up on its hind legs, 800 pounds of muscle and claw and teeth, and they had just run straight into its territory. Oh, God! The bear roared. The sound echoed across the valley like thunder. The horses below panicked, rearing and bucking. 2 riders were thrown. The rest fought to control their mounts. Run! Jacob shoved Sister Margaret to the side, away from the direct path to the bear. Reverend Grayson stumbled after her. The bear, confused by multiple targets, chose the closest one. It chose Jacob. The animal charged down the slope with terrifying speed. Nothing that large should move that fast. Jacob raised his rifle, knowing it was useless. A rifle bullet might wound a grizzly, might make it angry, but it wouldn't stop it. He fired anyway. Once, twice, 3 times. The bear kept coming. At the last second, Jacob threw himself to the side. The bear's claws missed his face by inches. But they caught his shoulder, tearing through his coat and shirt and the flesh beneath. He felt ribs crack, felt hot blood poured down his side. He rolled in the snow trying to get away, but the bear was already turning, coming back for another pass. This time it wouldn't miss. A gunshot rang out. The bear's head snapped sideways. It roared again, shaking its massive skull. Another shot, this one from a different direction. Sister Margaret and Reverend Grayson were both shooting, the Winchester and the Colt cracking in the cold air. The bear, wounded and confused, turned away from Jacob and charged the new threats. No! Jacob tried to stand, but his leg wouldn't support him. The pain in his ribs was like fire. He could taste blood in his mouth. The bear was 10 feet from Sister Margaret when the final shot came. But it didn't come from below. It came from behind. A single rifle shot, heavy caliber, perfectly placed. The bullet entered the bear's skull just behind the ear and blew out the other side, taking bone and brain matter with it. The animal dropped like a puppet with cut strings, dead before it hit the ground. Jacob looked up at the princess. Standing there, rifle still raised, was a man. Tall, lean, wearing a long coat and a fur hat. Even from 200 yards away, Jacob knew who it was. Victor Volkov, the professional, the killer Colton Brennan had hired, and he had just saved their lives. The Russian lowered his rifle slowly. For a long moment, he just stood there, looking down at them. Then he did something Jacob would never forget as long as he lived. He tipped his hat, a gesture of respect, of acknowledgement. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the rocks of the pass. Below them, the posse was in chaos, men shouting, horses still panicking, and Colton Brennan screaming orders that no one was following anymore. Sister Margaret reached Jacob first, her medical training overriding everything else. She tore open his coat to examine the wounds. 4 deep gashes across his shoulder and chest. Blood everywhere. But the ribs would heal, the flesh would knit. He would live. Why, Jacob managed to gasp out. Why did he save us? Sister Margaret was already packing snow into the wounds to slow the bleeding, her hands moving with professional efficiency despite their own injuries. I don't know, but we need to move. Now, before they reorganize. Reverend Grayson helped Jacob to his feet. The 3 of them stumbled toward the pass, leaving a trail of red in the white snow. Behind them, the dead bear lay steaming in the cold air. And further down, Colton Brennan remounted his horse, his face set with determination that said this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. They reached the pass and collapsed behind a boulder, gasping for breath. The sun was fully up now, painting the mountains in shades of gold and pink. It would have been beautiful if they weren't bleeding and freezing and running for their lives. Jacob looked at his companions. A nun with wounded hands, an old preacher with a young man's courage, and himself torn open by a bear, wanted by the law, with nothing left in the world except his life and his rifle and these two people who had chosen to stand with Hyman. It should have felt like defeat, like the end of everything. But somehow, bleeding in the snow as the sun rose over the mountains, Jacob Stone felt more alive than he had in 12 years. Because he wasn't alone anymore. Because someone had needed him. Because he had made a choice that mattered. And whatever came next, whether it was more running or a final stand or a bullet with his name on it, at least he would face it as a man who had tried to do right. At least he would die for something instead of just waiting to die for nothing. Below them, the posse was forming up again. Colton Brennan was pointing up at the pass, giving orders. They would come again. Soon. "Can you shoot?" Reverend Grayson asked quietly. Jacob checked his rifle. 3 bullets left. Not many, but enough. "I can shoot. Then we make them pay for every inch. We hold this pass until we can't hold it anymore. And we don't let them take her alive." Sister Margaret looked at both men, these warriors who had become her protectors. "Thank you, both of you, for everything. Don't thank us yet, sister. Day's not over." They settled in behind the rocks and waited. Wounded, outnumbered, out of options. But not out of fight. Not yet. Not while they still had bullets and breath and each other. The sun climbed higher. The mountain wind picked up, carrying with it the smell of snow and blood and smoke from the burning cabin miles below. And 3 people who should have died waited to see if they would live another hour, another day. Another moment of borrowed time in a world that wanted them dead. They held the pass for 3 hours. 3 hours of waiting and watching and trying not to bleed to death. Jacob's wounds had stopped flowing freely, but every breath sent sharp pain through his chest where the bear had cracked his ribs. Sister Margaret had packed the gashes with snow and bound them with strips torn from her habit, but he could feel the weakness creeping into his limbs. Blood loss, cold, exhaustion catching up. Below them, Colton Brennan's men had made camp just out of rifle range. Smart. They weren't going to rush up that narrow pass into prepared defensive positions. They were going to wait. Wait for the 3 fugitives to run out of ammunition. Wait for them to freeze. Wait for them to make a mistake. Time was on the posse's side. Reverend Grayson sat with his back against a boulder, the Colt resting on his knee. His breathing had finally slowed to normal after the desperate run up the mountain. "Mr. Stone, I've been thinking about what that Russian did. Why would a hired gun save the very people he was paid to kill?" Jacob watched the distant figures below. Maybe he decided the money wasn't worth it. Or maybe he saw something that reminded him why he became a man instead of just a killer. Sister Margaret had been quiet for the past hour, her hands pressed together in prayer. Now she lowered them and spoke. But before she could speak about wolves and compassion, her stomach lurched. The nausea came in a wave so strong she had to grip the rock to steady herself. Jacob noticed immediately. "You all right?" "Just tired." She forced a smile, but inside her mind was racing. The signs had been there for days. The morning sickness she had dismissed as hunger. The exhaustion that felt different from just being tired. The tenderness in her breasts that she had ignored. She had treated enough pregnant women to recognize the symptoms, but acknowledging them in herself felt impossible. Not here. Not now. Not when they were bleeding and freezing and might die within the hour. She pressed a hand to her stomach, the gesture hidden by her torn habit. If she was right, if her body was telling her what she thought it was telling her, then everything had changed. They weren't fighting for 2 lives anymore. 3. She looked at Jacob, pale and wounded, blood seeping through his bandages. At Reverend Grayson, gripping his last 4 bullets like a lifeline. No, she couldn't tell them. Not now. Knowing might make them reckless, might make them try something heroic and stupid that would get them killed. This secret was hers alone. For now. She took a breath and steadied herself. "When I was training to be a nurse, there was a doctor who told me something I never forgot." And she continued with the 2 wolves story, as if her entire world hadn't just shifted beneath her feet. When I was training to be a nurse, there was a doctor who told me something I never forgot. He said that every person carries two wolves inside them. One wolf is cruelty, fear, hatred. The other is compassion, courage, love. And the wolf that wins is the one you feed. Which wolf you think won in that Russian? I think he stopped feeding the wrong one. Even if just for a moment, the sun climbed higher, but the temperature barely rose. They were above 10,000 feet now, in that realm where winter never fully releases its grip. Jacob's wounds had started to stiffen. Every movement pulled at torn flesh. He needed rest, medical attention, warmth. Things he wasn't going to get sitting behind a rock with 3 bullets and 20 armed men below. Around noon, a single rider detached from the group below and rode partway up the slope. He stopped well out of rifle range and called up to them. "Stone, can you hear me?" Jacob recognized the voice. "Sheriff Cooper, I hear you. Colton wants me to tell you that if you send down the woman, he'll let you and the Reverend go free." Jacob looked at Sister Margaret. She met his eyes steadily, waiting for him to decide her fate. The old Jacob, the one who had hidden in these mountains for 12 years, might have considered it, might have weighed his life against hers and found hers wanting. But that Jacob had died somewhere between the cottonwood tree and this frozen pass. "Tell Colton that Sister Margaret stays with us. If he wants her, he'll have to go through me. And I promise him he won't like how that turns out. Be reasonable, Stone. You can't win this. There's 20 of us and 3 of you. You're wounded. You got maybe a handful of bullets left. Surrender now while you still can. The only surrender that happens today is yours, Sheriff. You rode up here to arrest an innocent woman, and you did it because Colton Brennan owns your mortgage and your conscience. I got no respect for that kind of law." There was a long pause. When Sheriff Cooper spoke again, his voice was quieter, sadder. "You're right. About all of it. But knowing the right thing doesn't always mean you can do it. Some of us got families, got children who need food, got wives who need medicine. We can't all be heroes, Stone." "No, but you can try to be decent. That's something." The sheriff turned his horse and rode back down. Jacob watched him go and felt something like pity. Cooper wasn't a bad man, just a weak one. And in this country, weakness killed you as surely as evil. They're going to attack again. Reverend Grayson checked his ammunition. 4 bullets left in the Colt. That's all we have left, isn't it? After that, we're done. Jacob looked at his own rifle. 3 bullets. Then he checked Sister Margaret's Winchester. She had 5 rounds remaining. 12 bullets total between 3 people. We make them count, and we don't waste a shot. The attack came an hour later, and it came from an unexpected direction. Not from below where they were watching, but from above, from the rocks higher up the mountain. Jacob caught movement from the corner of his eye. Looked up, saw 3 men working their way down from the ridge. They must have circled around during the night, climbed up the far side, and now they were above the pass. Above the defenders. Up high, 3 men. Reverend Grayson spun and fired. The range was extreme for a pistol, maybe 60 yards. The bullet sparked off rock near the climbers but didn't hit flesh. They scattered, taking cover. Now the attack from below began. Men rushing up the pass while the defenders were distracted. A coordinated assault. Professional. Jacob fired once. A man went down, clutching his leg. He fired again. Another man stumbled. His last bullet took a 3rd man in the shoulder, spinning him around. The rifle was empty, and they were still coming. Reverend Grayson's Colt barked 3 times, 2 hits, 1 miss. His last bullet jammed. A misfire. He worked the mechanism frantically, but it wouldn't clear. That left Sister Margaret with the Winchester. 5 bullets against 15 men. She stood, exposed herself fully to get a clear sight picture, and began shooting. Her hands were steady, her breathing controlled. The doctor's daughter, who had never killed anything until yesterday, became a warrior in that moment. She fired 5 times. 5 men fell or dove for cover. Then her rifle clicked empty too. Jacob grabbed a rock. It was all he had left. A rock the size of his fist. If they got close enough, he would use it. And then his hands. And then his teeth, if it came to that. But the rush stopped. The men below, seeing 3 defenders who refused to quit, who had made them pay in blood for every yard, lost their nerve. They retreated back down the slope, dragging their wounded with them. The 3 from above had also pulled back, unwilling to come down within hand-to-hand range of people with nothing left to lose. We did it. Sister Margaret lowered the empty rifle, her whole body shaking. We held them off. For now. Jacob slumped against the rock, pain washing over him in waves. But they'll be back, and next time we got nothing to stop them with. Then we run again. Where? Look around, sister. We're at the top of the world. There's nowhere left to run to. This is the end of the line. She looked at him, this mountain man who had saved her life, who had given up everything to protect a stranger, who was now bleeding and broken but still defiant. Then we die here, together, standing up. Before Jacob could answer, they heard it, a sound that didn't belong. Not gunfire, not shouting, something else. A single horse, coming up the pass from below. Walking slowly, deliberately. They tensed, ready to throw rocks if needed, but the rider who appeared was not who they expected. It was a woman, middle-aged, dressed in expensive clothes now covered in trail dust, riding a bay mare. Her face was pale but determined, and even from a distance, Jacob could see the resemblance to the young man whose death had started all of this. Elizabeth Brennan, Colton's wife. She rode up to within speaking distance and stopped. Her hands were empty, held high to show she carried no weapons. Sister Margaret, Mr. Stone, Reverend Grayson, my name is Elizabeth Brennan. I need to speak with you, please. It's important. This is a trick. Reverend Grayson positioned himself between the woman and Sister Margaret. Your husband wants to kill us, and you come riding up here alone? I don't believe it. It's not a trick. I came alone because Colton doesn't know I'm here. If he did, he would stop me, because what I have to say will destroy him. Then say it and go. Elizabeth dismounted with the stiff movements of someone not used to riding long distances. She walked forward until she was only 20 feet away, close enough that they could see her eyes were red from crying. Sister Margaret didn't kill my son. I've known that from the beginning. I was there the night Benjamin died. I watched Dr. Hammond treat him. I saw the doctor pour the mercury. His hands were shaking. He had been drinking since morning. And I watched him pour far too much into the glass. 25 grains, when the correct dose is 10. Why didn't you say anything? Sister Margaret's voice was quiet but intense. Why did you let them blame me? Because I was a coward. Elizabeth's voice broke. Because Colton was so destroyed by Benjamin's death that he needed someone to blame. And Dr. Hammond offered him you, a foreign woman, a Catholic, someone different, someone easy to hate. And I told myself that maybe the doctor was right. Maybe you had cursed Benjamin somehow. Because accepting that truth meant accepting that our son died from a simple mistake, that there was no grand evil, no purpose, just bad luck and a drunk doctor. She wiped tears from her face with a gloved hand. I've lived with that guilt every day since. Every night I see Benjamin's face, and I know I betrayed him by not speaking the truth, by letting an innocent woman be blamed for his death. So why speak now? Jacob asked. Why come here today? Because last night after the cabin burned, I overheard Colton talking to his men, planning how they would kill all of you, not just Sister Margaret, all of you. And I realized that if I stayed silent, I wouldn't just have Benjamin's blood on my hands. I would have yours too, and I couldn't live with that. She reached into her coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. This is a letter from Dr. Hammond. He gave it to me 3 days ago, made me promise not to open it unless something happened to him. Last night after you escaped, the doctor went into his office and drank a bottle of laudanum. He's dead, and this is what he wanted the world to know. She handed the letter to Reverend Grayson, who unfolded it with shaking hands. He read aloud, his voice gaining strength as he went. To whom it may concern, my name is Dr. Philip Hammond. I am writing this because I can no longer live with what I have done. On the night of December 1st, 1878, I treated Benjamin Brennan for typhoid fever. I was intoxicated. I have been intoxicated most days for the past 5 years, since my own wife passed. In my impaired state, I administered 25 grains of mercury to young Mr. Brennan. The correct therapeutic dose is 10 grains. By the time I realized my error, it was too late. The boy died not from disease, but from mercury poisoning. From my hand, from my negligence. When Colton Brennan demanded to know why his son died while another boy lived, I blamed Sister Margaret Rose. I called her a witch. I suggested she had used unnatural means. I did this to save my own reputation and livelihood. In doing so, I condemned an innocent woman to death. I can no longer bear this guilt. By the time this letter is read, I will have taken my own life. It is less than I deserve. To Sister Margaret, I offer my deepest apologies, though I know they mean nothing. To the Brennan family, I offer the truth. Your son died because of me, because I was too weak and too proud to admit I had become a danger to my patients. May God have mercy on my soul, for I have none for myself. Dr. Philip Hammond. The pass fell silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Elizabeth looked up at the three defenders. I'm going to take this letter to Sheriff Cooper. I'm going to read it in front of all those men down there. And then I'm going to tell my husband that if he harms any of you, I will leave him. I will take him what's left of our money, and I will make sure everyone from here to Denver knows what really happened. That Colton Brennan tried to murder innocent people because he couldn't face the truth. That might get you killed too, Jacob said it gently. Colton's not in his right mind. A man that far gone might do anything, I know. But I should have died the day I let an innocent woman take the blame for my cowardice. Every day since has been borrowed time. It's past due that I pay it back. She turned to leave, then stopped. Sister Margaret, my son spoke of you before he died. In his delirium, he said you had kind hands, that you tried to help him even when we wouldn't let you. I want you to know that. I want you to know he saw your goodness, even if the rest of us were too blind. Then Elizabeth Brennan mounted her horse and rode back down the pass, carrying the truth that would either save them or doom them all. The three defenders waited. There was nothing else they could do. Their ammunition was gone. Their strength was fading. They had played every card they had. Now it was up to other people to decide if truth mattered more than revenge. 20 minutes later, they heard shouting from below. Angry voices. Then one voice rising above the others, Elizabeth Brennan, reading the letter aloud. Her words carried up the pass in fragments, each one like a stone dropped into still water. Mercury poisoning, 25 grains, doctor's negligence, innocent woman, a roar of denial, Colton's voice cracking with rage. That's a lie. My wife has been deceived. That letter is forgery. But other voices joined in, not supporting him, questioning. Wait, Colton, I was there that night. One of the miners, his voice uncertain. I saw Doc Hammond's hands shaking. Thought it was odd at the time. And I saw him drinking all morning before he went to your house. Another voice. Bottle after bottle of whiskey. The unified mob that had ridden up the mountain with torches and rope began to fracture. Doubt spread like cracks in ice. You're all fools, Colton screamed. Bewitched by that woman's devil magic. Who stands with me? Who will see justice done? Silence. Only 3 men stepped forward. The rest backed away, suddenly interested in their boots, their horses, anything but Colton Brennan's eyes. Sheriff Cooper's voice cut through the chaos. Colton Brennan, by the authority vested in me and by order of the circuit judge, I'm placing you under arrest for attempted murder, destruction of property, and inciting a riot. You don't have the spine, Cooper. You never did. Maybe not. But I do. Deputy Billy Hawkins stepped forward, his revolver drawn and steady. His voice was calm, but his hand didn't shake. You're coming with us, Mr. Brennan. We can do this peaceful, or we can do it hard. Your choice. The air went tight. Colton's hand drifted toward his gun belt. Don't. Billy cocked his pistol. The click was loud in the sudden silence. I've got 20 witnesses who'll swear you drew first. Don't make me do this. For a long moment, Colton stood frozen. Then something inside him broke. His shoulders sagged. The rage drained from his face, leaving only exhaustion and grief. My son is dead. My wife has abandoned me. My name is ruined. What more can you take from me? Your freedom, Billy said quietly, until a judge decides what happens next. 2 men took Colton's arms gently, almost respectfully. He didn't resist, just walked like a man in a dream, a nightmare he couldn't wake from. Then one of Colton's 3 remaining loyalists made his move. His hand flashed to his gun, but Billy was faster. The shot rang out across the pass. The man fell, clutching his shoulder, screaming. Anyone else? Billy's voice was steel. No one moved. The remaining 2 loyalists slowly raised their hands and stepped back. It was over. Jacob closed his eyes. Someone had just died. The question was who? Footsteps on the trail. Multiple people. Coming up. Jacob prepared himself for the end. At least they had tried. At least they had made it count. But the men who appeared around the bend were not carrying weapons at the ready. Sheriff Cooper was in front, his badge glinting in the afternoon sun. Behind him came 5 other men. No Colton, no hired guns, just townspeople looking tired and ashamed. It's over. Sheriff Cooper stopped 10 feet away. Colton's under arrest. Attempted murder. Destruction of property. Inciting a riot. He'll stand trial in Denver. And us? Jacob asked. You're free to go. All charges dropped. The circuit judge already signed the paperwork based on Dr. Hammond's confession. He looked at Sister Margaret. I'm sorry, sister, for all of it. We should have listened. Should have investigated. Should have been better. Is anyone going to say that's not enough? Reverend Grayson's voice was hard. That sorry doesn't fix a burned cabin, or a woman almost hanged, or a man torn open by a bear. No, it's not enough. Sheriff Cooper met his eyes. Nothing would be enough. But it's all I got to offer. That and my badge. He unpinned the star from his chest and held it out. I'm done. Can't be a lawman if I'm too scared to enforce the law. Billy Hawkins will make a better sheriff than I ever was. He's got the spine I don't. Sister Margaret stood slowly. Sheriff, I don't want your badge. I don't want your guilt. I just want to go somewhere safe and never see this town again. Can't say I blame you. Cooper pocketed the badge. There's a wagon at the bottom of the trail. Medical supplies, food, money that folks in town collected. It's not much, but it's something. And there's a reverend in Durango who'll give you sanctuary if you want it. 2 days' ride south. Jacob tried to stand and nearly fell. His vision swam. The blood loss was catching up. Reverend Grayson caught him, supported his weight. This man needs a doctor. Sister Margaret moved to Jacob's side. Real medical attention. Not what I can do with snow and torn cloth. There's a surgeon in Durango too. But I don't know if he can make it 2 days the shape he's in. Then we better get moving. They made their way down the mountain slowly. Jacob between Sister Margaret and Reverend Grayson, each step in agony. His wounds had reopened during the walk. Fresh blood soaked through the makeshift bandages. At the bottom of the trail, they found the wagon as promised. And standing beside it, to Jacob's surprise, was Viktor Volkov. The Russian gunfighter leaned against the wagon bed, arms crossed, that long rifle slung over his shoulder. Come to finish the job? Jacob reached for a weapon he no longer had. Viktor shook his head. I came to help you into the wagon. You look like you're about to fall over. Why? Why help us? Why save us from the bear? The Russian was quiet for a moment. Then he spoke, his accent thick but his words clear. My mother was a nun in Siberia. When I was boy, maybe 8 years old, there was famine. People dying in streets. My father already dead from cold. Just me and my mother. She gave me her food every day, gave me her blanket, her warmth, everything. And she got weaker and weaker. He looked at Sister Margaret. One day the sisters at her convent found us. They took us in, fed us, saved us. My mother lived 6 more years because of them. She taught me that there is difference between killing for money and killing for evil. The first is dobam, the second is sin. And killing a nun, that is sin I cannot commit, not for any price. He helped Jacob into the wagon with surprising gentleness for a man who killed for a living. You go to Durango, you heal, you live good life, and you forget about Colton Brennan and this cursed mountain. What will you do? Viktor smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Find another Joe. Another person who thinks the money can buy anything. The world is never short of such men. He tipped his hat to Sister Margaret, nodded to Reverend Grayson, and walked away. They watched him disappear into the trees, a killer who had chosen mercy, a man feeding the right wolf. The wagon ride to Durango took 3 days instead of 2. They had to stop frequently for Jacob's wounds. Sister Margaret cleaned them, stitched them properly, used real medicine from the supplies the town had sent. But infection had set in. Fever came and went. Jacob drifted between consciousness and delirium. In his fever dreams, he saw his wife, saw his son, saw the Mexican woman and child he had killed 15 years ago. But now, for the first time, he also saw them forgive him, saw them smile and turn away and walk into light. When the fever finally broke on the morning of the 4th day, he opened his eyes to find Sister Margaret sitting beside the wagon, her head bowed in prayer. The morning sun lit her hair like a crown. You're awake, she touched his forehead, checking for fever. The worst is past, you'll live. Thanks to you, thanks to both of us, you kept me alive, I kept you alive. That seems fair. They reached Durango on the evening of the 5th day. The surgeon there, a competent man named Dr. Walsh, examined Jacob's wounds and pronounced him lucky to be breathing. Another day, and the infection would have killed you. But you'll heal. Give it time. Time was something Jacob had plenty of now. With his cabin burned and his old life gone, he had nothing but time. Sister Margaret stayed in Durango, working at the small clinic attached to the church. The Reverend there, Father Michael, had welcomed her without question. She was good at her work, he said. The town needed her. She could stay as long as she wanted. Reverend Grayson returned to Silver Point to collect his son and what remained of his life there. He came back 2 weeks later with news. Colton Brennan had been sentenced to 5 years in prison. Elizabeth Brennan had sold the mine and donated most of the money to build a hospital. She kept just enough to live modestly and had taken a job as a teacher. The town was healing. Slowly, but healing. Jacob stayed in a boarding house while his body mended. He should have been planning his next move, deciding where to go, what to do. But every day he found himself walking to the clinic, sitting on the bench outside watching Sister Margaret work through the window. One evening she came out and sat beside him. You know, Mr. Stone, sitting out here every day, people are going to talk. Let them talk. I got nowhere else to be. You could rebuild. Go back up to the mountains. Start over. Could, but I don't want to. What do you want? He was quiet for a long time. Then he said the thing he had been thinking for weeks, but hadn't dared speak aloud. I want to stop running. Stop hiding. Stop living like a ghost. I want to be part of the world again. Even if the world's messy and complicated and full of people who make mistakes. She took his hand, her fingers gentle on his scarred palm. I want that too. I thought I wanted to be separate from the world. That's why I became a nun. But these past weeks, I've realized something. God doesn't want us to hide from life. He wants us to live it, fully, completely. Even the parts that hurt. The church might not agree with that interpretation. Then perhaps I'm not meant to be a nun anymore. He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw in her eyes the same thing he felt. A connection forged in fire and blood and survival, something that couldn't be denied or reasoned away. What are you saying, sister? I'm saying my name is Margaret, just Margaret, and I'm asking if you would like to start over, together, not as a nun and a hermit, but as two people who've been given a second chance and don't want to waste it. Jacob felt something crack open in his chest, something that had been frozen for 12 years. It hurt, but it was a good hurt. The hurt of something dead coming back to life. Yes, I would like that very much. They were married 3 weeks later by Father Michael. It was a small ceremony. Reverend Grayson stood as witness. A handful of townspeople attended. Nothing fancy, nothing elaborate, just two people making promises they intended to keep. They bought a small house on the edge of Durango. Nothing like the cabin Jacob had lost, but enough. Enough for two people to build a life. Margaret opened a clinic in one of the rooms. Jacob worked as a guide for hunters and surveyors who needed someone who knew the mountains. The money wasn't much, but it was honest, clean, earned without hiding from the world. The scars faded over time. The ones on the outside, at least. The ones inside remained, but they hurt less. And on the nights when the nightmares came, when Jacob woke gasping from dreams of burning camps and dying children, Margaret was there. She didn't tell him to forget, didn't say it would be all right. She just held him and reminded him that the past didn't define the future unless you let it. In the spring, they learned Margaret was pregnant. The news terrified Jacob. He had lost a wife and child before. The idea of going through that again made him want to run back to his mountain and hide. But Margaret wouldn't let him run. This is not the same. I am not Rachel. This child is not Daniel. This is new. This is now. And we face it together. The baby was born on a cold November night. A girl. They named her Hope, because that's what she was. Hope for a better future. Hope that the broken could heal. Hope that mercy was stronger than revenge. 5 years passed, then 10. Jacob's hair turned fully gray. Margaret's face gained lines around her eyes from smiling. Hope grew into a bright, curious child who showed her mother's compassion and her father's strength. They took in other children over the years. Orphans, foundlings, kids who needed a home. The small house became fuller, louder, messier, more alive. On Hope's 10th birthday, an old man rode into Durango on a tired horse. He was bent with age, one eye clouded, one arm hanging useless from a long-ago stroke. But Jacob recognized him immediately. "Father," Jeremiah Stone looked at his son with his one good eye. "Heard you were here. Heard you got yourself a family. Thought I'd come see if it was true." Jacob hadn't seen his father in 14 years. Not since he ran to the mountains after Daniel died. Part of him wanted to be angry, to ask where the old man had been when he needed him. But looking at his father now, aged and broken and alone, all Jacob felt was sadness. "It's true, come inside. Meet your grandchildren." Jeremiah Stone spent his last 3 years living with them. He taught Hope and the other children how to read tracks, how to find water, how to survive in the wild. He told stories of the old days, of mountain men and beaver trappers in a West that was already disappearing into legend. And on quiet evenings, when the children were asleep, Jeremiah would sit with Jacob on the porch and they would talk, really talk, about regrets and mistakes and the weight of the past, about forgiveness and second chances and the possibility of redemption. "I wasn't a good father," Jeremiah said it one evening as they watched the sun set over the mountains. "I was hard on you. Expected too much. Showed too little love. You were the father you knew how to be. Just like I'm trying to be the father I know how to be. That's all any of us can do." The old man nodded. "You turned out better than me, boy. Better than I deserved. I had help. When Jeremiah died in his sleep that winter, they buried him in the small cemetery on the hill overlooking Durango. The whole town came to the funeral. Not because they had known Jeremiah well, but because they knew Jacob, knew Margaret, knew the family that had become part of the fabric of their community." Standing at the grave, holding his daughter's hand, Jacob thought about the long road that had brought him here. From soldier to killer, to hermit, to husband, to father. All the choices, all the chances, all the moments where he could have gone a different way and ended up somewhere else. He thought about the cottonwood tree where he had found Margaret, about the pass where they had made their stand, about the Russian gunfighter who chose mercy, about Elizabeth Brennan who chose truth, about all the small acts of courage and kindness that had saved them. And he understood finally what Margaret had been trying to tell him all along. Redemption wasn't a destination, it was a direction. Every day you woke up and chose to be better than you were yesterday, to feed the right wolf, to do the next right thing even when it cost you everything. That night, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Margaret found him standing by the window, looking out at the mountains where he had once hidden from the world. Missing it? The solitude? "No, I was just thinking about how much time I wasted up there. 12 years of my life spent running from ghosts. 12 years I could have been living instead of just surviving." She put her arms around him from behind. "You weren't ready to live yet. Sometimes we need the wilderness, the solitude, the silence. We needed to hear what we can't hear in the noise. You needed those 12 years to become the man who would cut down a stranger from a tree, the man who would risk everything for someone he barely knew. And now you're exactly where you need to be." They stood together in the darkness, two people who had been broken and remade, watching the stars come out over Durango. In the next room, children slept safe and warm. In the clinic downstairs, medicines waited to heal the sick. In the town below, people lived and loved and made mistakes and tried again. It wasn't perfect. It would never be perfect. But it was real, it was honest, it was earned. And for Jacob Stone, who had once been called Bear, who had once lived alone with his ghosts and his guilt, it was more than enough. It was everything. 5 years became 10, then 20. The small house on the edge of Durango grew with them, not in size but in life. Hope, the daughter born that first November, grew into a young woman with her mother's green eyes and her father's quiet strength. Other children came too, orphans from mining accidents, a boy whose parents died from fever, 2 sisters left on the church steps. Jacob and Margaret took them all in, built beds with their own hands, stretched their food and love to cover however many needed covering. Margaret's clinic became known across 3 counties. People traveled days to see the woman who had once been called witch, but was really just a healer with steady hands and a kind heart. Jacob guided hunters through the mountains in summer, taught survival to boys who needed it in winter. His hair went white, his hands grew gnarled with arthritis. The scars from the bear never fully faded. But every morning he woke next to Margaret, and that was enough. On a spring evening, 30 years after the cottonwood tree, they sat on their porch watching the sunset over the mountains. The same mountains where he had once hidden from the world, where she had once hung from a tree, waiting to die. "Do you ever think about that day?" Margaret asked, her head on his shoulder. "Every day," Jacob said, "but not the way you'd think." "How then?" "I think about what happened, not what almost happened. Everything good in my life came from the moment I decided to stop, to care, to help a stranger. We saved each other. We did. In the house behind them, Hope was putting her own children to bed. In the town below, Margaret's clinic still served the sick. And on a mountain far to the north, a cottonwood tree stood alone, the rope long gone, a silent witness to the day one man chose mercy over indifference. Jacob took Margaret's hand. She squeezed back. Two people who had been lost, who had been broken, who had found each other in fire and blood and chose every single day to make their second chance matter. The sun sank below the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold. And that was enough. That was everything.